You've heard it 1,000 times, right? In boardrooms, in all hands meetings. Our people are our greatest asset. It sounds good, it feels true. But if they're an asset, how do you actually measure them? How do you put a real value on the very engine that drives your entire organization? Let's dive in and try to figure that out. And that's the central challenge, isn't it? We're totally comfortable putting a price tag on our buildings, our software, our equipment, but when it comes to the skills, the knowledge, the sheer effort of our people, our human capital, things get, well, they get a lot more complicated. Can we really go from a nice-sounding platitude to a real, tangible measurement? So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at why there's a disconnect in how companies talk about their people. Then we'll dig into why this is so darn hard to do in the first place. We'll break down a simple framework for measurement, take a quick tour of a few powerful models, and then land on what I think is the most important takeaway of all. All right, let's start with this disconnect, because there is a huge gap between what leaders say about their people and what their organizations actually do to understand their value. Now, this chart tells a really interesting story. Research shows that a massive 86% of directors say, yes, we absolutely value our employees as key assets. Great, but then, look at that second bar. Only 68% of them actually measure the contribution made by those employees. That nearly 20-point gap, that's the problem. That's where good intentions fall apart. So why does that gap even exist? If pretty much everyone agrees that people are valuable, why is measuring that value so incredibly difficult? Let's break down some of the core challenges. And here is the absolute crucial point. You can own a factory. You can own a fleet of trucks. You can put those things on a balance sheet. But you don't own your employees' skills, their ideas, or their experience. You only get access to that incredible value through a relationship, a human agreement. And that makes measuring it fundamentally different from any other asset. This leads us to a concept called discretionary effort. And this is the secret sauce. It's the extra passion, the creativity, the energy that an employee chooses to give, just beyond the bare minimum to not get fired. A company's success pretty much hinges on unlocking this optional effort. But how on earth do you measure something that's a choice? This also illustrates another massive hurdle, the difference between just having data and actually having a measurement. It's easy to collect raw data, like the number of absences, but to turn that into a meaningful measurement, you have to define the rules. Does sick leave count? What about a family emergency? If my department defines absence differently than yours, our data is useless for comparison. Real measurement requires a strategy, not just a bigger spreadsheet. Okay, so it's definitely complex, but we can simplify it. Let's look at a basic framework that helps organize all these human capital metrics into 3 distinct levels. Think of it like climbing a ladder. At the bottom rung, you have activity measures. This is just counting stuff, like the number of training days. Simple, but it doesn't tell you the real impact. You take a step up, and you get to performance measures. Now we're looking for outcomes, like did productivity actually improve? And then at the very top of the ladder, you have added value measures. This asks the ultimate question. Did the value we got back outweigh the cost? This is where you find the holy grail, stuff like return on investment. All right, with that ladder framework in our heads, let's explore a couple of powerful models that real organizations use to try and climb it and put all this theory into actual practice. First up is the Mercer model. Now, this one is all about drawing a direct line from a company's people-related practices all the way to its business performance and ultimately to shareholder value. So let's focus on this wheel you see here, because this is the core of the model. It shows 6 factors that all have to work together. It starts at the top with people, the skills you hire. Moving clockwise, you've got work processes and managerial structure, which is basically how work gets done. Down at the bottom, there's information and decision-making, how knowledge flows and who gets to make the calls. And finally, you have rewards, which is how you motivate everybody. The key insight of the model is that all 6 of these pieces have to be perfectly aligned to really drive that shareholder value. The really great thing about this model is that it forces you to take that holistic view. You can't just fixate on one piece of the puzzle. The big challenge, though, it is super data hungry. To really use it right, you need a level of detailed information that, frankly, a lot of organizations just don't have yet. Okay, let's move on to our second model. This is the Human Capital Index, and it takes a different approach. It tries to link specific HR practices directly to a company's market value. And this is just fascinating. The index actually found that getting certain practices right has a quantifiable impact. I mean, look at that top line. A strong system for total rewards and accountability was linked to a 16.5% increase in market value. That is a powerful, powerful argument for investing in better people management. Even things like having a flexible workplace or clear communication show a really significant impact. So the benefit here is crystal clear. It provides strong evidence that how you manage people really matters to the bottom line. The limitation, though, is that it focuses on best practices. But what works for a scrappy tech startup might be a total disaster for a huge manufacturing firm. The real key is finding what works for your specific strategy and culture, not just copy-pasting a template. And that brings us to the final, and I think the most important idea in this entire explainer. Because after all this talk of models and metrics, the real secret isn't about finding the perfect number. It's about something else entirely. Just take a moment to read this quote. Let it sink in. Measures are less important than the activity of measuring. This idea, it completely flips the entire conversation on its head. So what does that really mean? It means the true value doesn't come from getting a single perfect number to put on a slide deck. The value comes from the process of trying to measure. It's the strategic conversations it forces you to have. It's the arguments about what truly drives value in your business and the tough decisions you make along the way. That activity of measuring is what achieves real results. That's how you test if your business strategy is actually working. It's how you evaluate the true costs and benefits of your actions. It's how you assess the real impact of that new leadership program. The process itself becomes the engine for continuous improvement. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Forget trying to measure everything. Based on your company's unique goals, what is the one human capital metric you could start measuring tomorrow that would spark the right conversations and help you truly understand if your strategy is on track? Because the answer to that, that's where the real value lies.